The day I walked into my father's house wearing my dress blues, I thought maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. It wasn't. He looked at me the way he always had, like I was still 17, asking for permission to stay out past 9. Like the gold insignia on my collar meant nothing more than a costume I'd borrowed from someone who actually deserved it. "You look tired," he said. That was it. That was the whole thing. My mother squeezed my arm from behind. She'd seen my face. She always saw my face before I could put it away. I'd driven 4 hours from the base to be there for my youngest sister's birthday dinner. I wasn't even supposed to have the weekend off. My commanding officer had done me a favor, and I'd burned through half a tank of gas on I-95 to sit at a table where my father would spend most of the evening, talking about my brother-in-law's new contracting business and asking my mother if the roast was done yet. That's just how it was. That's how it had always been. My name is Adrian. I'm 34 years old. I've been a naval officer for 9 years, and for most of those 9 years I've been trying to figure out why none of it has ever been enough for my father. Not the commission, not the deployments, not the commendations that now line a shadow box my mother keeps on the mantle, because she knows I won't hang it myself. He's not a cruel man. I want to be clear about that. He's not the kind of father who screams or throws things or makes you feel worthless in obvious ways. It's quieter than that with him. It's the way he changes the subject. The way he'll praise someone else's kid in front of you without realizing, or maybe without caring, what that does. The way he once told me, when I was 22 and had just gotten my acceptance letter to officer candidate school, that I should think carefully about whether I really wanted that kind of life. He meant it as concern. I know that now. But concern and support aren't the same thing, and for a long time I confused the two. My father grew up in rural Georgia. His own father worked 2 jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on every month. My dad got out through sheer stubbornness, got a business degree from a state school on a partial scholarship, moved north, built something stable. He married my mother at 27 and they had 3 kids in 4 years. Me first, then my brother Calvin, then my sister Yolanda. He was proud of Calvin from jump. Calvin played ball. Calvin was loud and easy and took up space the way my father understood. When Calvin quit college his junior year to manage a sporting goods store, my father called it finding his feet. When I graduated from OCS at the top of my class, my father asked if the Navy gave dental. I'm not bitter about it anymore. I want to say that clearly too, because this story isn't about bitterness. It's about something else. It's about the moment I finally understood that I had been waiting for something my father was never going to give me, and how it took a stranger, a man in white gloves standing next to a black SUV, to make that real. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The birthday dinner that night was fine. My sister Yolanda turned 30, and she was glowing, and her husband made a toast that was actually pretty funny, and my mom's roast really was good. I sat next to Calvin, who spent most of dinner showing me videos on his phone of his son's Little League games. I watched every single one. That boy has an arm. My father sat at the head of the table, the way he always did, and he held court the way he always did. And at some point the conversation turned to a man named Mr. Kellerman. Mr. Kellerman was the father of a boy my dad had coached in youth basketball about 20 years ago. Mr. Kellerman's son had become some kind of real estate developer, had his face on bus benches all over the county now. My father talked about him for a solid 10 minutes. How sharp that boy had always been. How he'd known from the start that kid was going places. I ate my roast. My mother looked at me across the table. I gave her the smallest shake of my head. Not tonight. After dinner, while Yolanda was opening gifts, my father sat in his recliner and I brought him a piece of cake. I don't know why I did it. Old habit, maybe. Or that thing where you keep trying to fill a cup that has a hole in the bottom. He took the plate without looking up from the game that was on. "Thanks, baby," he said. Baby. I was a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy and my father called me baby with the same energy he used to call me when I was 8 and bringing him the remote. I drove home that night with the windows down even though it was cold. I needed the air. I needed to feel something other than that particular hollowness. 3 weeks later, everything changed. And it didn't happen the way I expected. It never does. There's a naval exchange program that places officers in joint operations with allied forces. I'd been selected for a liaison role with a British delegation that was touring several East Coast installations. It was a 2-week assignment, mostly administrative, a lot of briefings and handshakes and dinners that were really meetings with better food. The final event was a formal reception at a hotel in downtown Washington. The kind of place with marble floors and chandeliers that make you feel like you're inside a birthday cake. Officers from half a dozen countries, diplomats, a few senators. The kind of room where everyone is performing a version of themselves. I was there in my full dress uniform. I'd given a brief earlier that day to a group of British and Australian officers on joint maritime logistics, and it had gone well. Well enough that the Rear Admiral had pulled me aside afterward to say he'd like me to consider a posting at the Pentagon in the fall. I hadn't said yes yet. I was still turning it over. The Pentagon means DC, and DC means traffic and politics in equal measure. But I was thinking about it. What I wasn't thinking about was my father. He called me that afternoon, just before the reception. I almost let it go to voicemail. I was in the middle of touching up my uniform, the white gloves laid out on the hotel bed, the whole ritual of it, but I picked up because there was a part of me that still always picked up. Your cousin posted something on Facebook's, he said. No, hello. Okay. She's saying you're some kind of big deal at this thing in DC. I'm at a conference, Dad. Ish made it sound like more than that. It's not nothing, I said. It's a good opportunity. There was a pause. Well, he said, don't let it go to your head. I stared at myself in the hotel mirror, full dress blues, the shoulder boards, the ribbons I'd earned in places I couldn't always talk about. The woman in that mirror had done things my father had never asked about and probably never would. I won't, I said. I have to go. All right, be safe. I hung up. I put on the white gloves. I went downstairs. The reception was on the hotel's top floor and the elevators opened right into it. I was a few minutes late, which I hated, so I came in moving. The way you do when you've got somewhere to be, and you're not going to slow down to be polished about it. A woman near the elevator bank smiled at me as I stepped out. I didn't know her. She was in civilian clothes, late 60s maybe, silver hair, the kind of posture that suggested either military background or very expensive boarding school commander, she said. I stopped. People didn't usually greet me by rank when they didn't know me. I'm sorry, I said. Have we met? Not formally. She extended her hand. Ellen Marsh. I'm the senior advisor to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. I shook her hand, firm grip. The kind that means something. I read your brief from this morning, she said. The one on joint logistics frameworks. The Rear Admiral forwarded it to our office. I didn't know that. He thought it was worth our attention. She tilted her head slightly. He was right. The section on cross-fleet supply chain redundancy, that was yours? Yes, ma'am. It's good work. She said it the way people say things when they mean them, without performance. We're putting together a task force. Cross-departmental. I'd like to talk to you about it sometime this week, if you're available. I told her I was. She handed me a card, smiled again, and moved off into the crowd. I stood there for a moment. I didn't let myself make too much of it, the way I'd learned not to. In the Navy, good things take a long time to become real things. You learn to hold possibility loosely, but something in my chest felt lighter than it had in a while. I almost didn't tell my father about Ellen Marsh. The calculus on that kind of thing had become automatic over the years. Weigh the effort against the return, decide if it's worth the particular sting of his non-reaction. Usually it wasn't. But my mother called the next morning, and she'd seen my cousin's Facebook post too, and she was so genuinely excited that I ended up telling her everything. The brief, the Rear Admiral, Ellen Marsh, the task force possibility. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Adrienne, she said. Baby, I have always known. That was all. I know, always known. It shouldn't have made me cry in a hotel bathroom at 7:30 in the morning, but there you go. Does Dad know? I asked, after I'd pulled myself together. I'll tell him, she said. Mom, I know. I'll be careful. She wasn't careful enough. That evening, my father called me. Your mother tells me you're being considered for some big position in Washington. It's not confirmed. It's a task force. A task force, he repeated. His tone was the one I'd been hearing my whole life. Measured. Like he was deciding how much credit to extend. Yes, well. A pause. Your brother's store got the county contract. Did I tell you that? They're going to be supplying equipment for all the parks and rec programs. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, white gloves still on the pillow from the night before. That's great, Dad. Tell Calvin I said congrats. I know he did. Another pause, longer this time. Be careful in DC, Adrian. That city'll eat you alive if you're not careful. I've been doing this for 9 years. I know you have. And then, something I hadn't expected, a softening in his voice that I didn't know what to do with. I just don't want you to get hurt. I didn't know what to say to that. So I said I had to go, and I meant it, and I hung up. Later I lay there in the dark, and thought about what it means to be loved by someone who doesn't know how to show it, without it looking like doubt. I'd spent so long trying to translate his language, that I'd started to feel like a foreigner in my own life. I was tired of translating. The task force took 6 months to materialize into something real. That's government speed. I was used to it. In the meantime, I requested and received the Pentagon posting. I found an apartment in Alexandria, 12 minutes from the metro, 3rd floor, with a window that faced west so I could watch the sky go orange in the evenings. I learned which coffee shop opened earliest, and which dry cleaner turned things around fastest and where to buy groceries without losing 45 minutes in parking. I built a life, a real one. The kind that was mine in a way that nothing had felt mine since I'd left for college at 18. I went home for Thanksgiving. My father and I were careful with each other the way people are when they've learned where the bruises are. We talked about the weather, Calvin's store, Yolanda's new house. We did not talk about my work, and I did not bring it up, and by the end of the night I'd decided this was probably just how it was going to be. I could live with that. I'd had to learn to live with smaller versions of that all my life. What I hadn't counted on was March. March came fast that year. One of those winters that drags until it doesn't. And then suddenly the cherry blossoms are out, and everyone in DC acts like they've never seen a flower before. My father was in town. He didn't come to visit me often. Actually, he'd only been to see me once since I'd moved to Alexandria, and that visit had lasted about 4 hours before he'd found a reason to head back up 95. But my mother had a longtime friend who lived in Silver Spring, a woman she'd met in a church choir in 1987, and kept up with ever since, and that friend's daughter was getting married. My parents were making a weekend of it. My mother asked if I wanted to have breakfast Saturday morning before the afternoon ceremony. I said yes, of course. I found a place in Bethesda I knew she'd like. Good eggs Benedict, nice light through the windows, not too loud. My father came too, that was fine. We did better in public, the three of us. Restaurants gave us a structure. Breakfast was good actually. My mother had clearly briefed him on some neutral topics. Bless her. Because he asked me about the apartment and whether I'd found a church and what the commute was like. I told him the truth. The apartment was small, but the light was good. I hadn't found a church yet, but I was looking. And the commute was terrible, but what could you do? He laughed at that last part. My father has a good laugh when he lets it out. Sounds like somebody dropped a bag of change. We were walking out to the parking garage afterward, the three of us, when it happened. There was a hotel next door to the restaurant. One of the bigger ones, the kind with a circular drive and a doorman and a line of black vehicles along the curb. Government vehicles, I clocked without thinking about it. The kind with the plates that tell you something's official but don't tell you what. A driver in a dark uniform was standing near the lead SUV. He was holding a placard the way drivers do when they're meeting someone. I didn't look at it closely. My father saw the cars and slowed down. He had that thing he did sometimes. A kind of reverence for the trappings of power that I'd always found interesting, given that he'd never acknowledged the same trappings when they applied to me. He liked the look of those vehicles. They meant something to him that I'd stopped trying to understand. Look at that, he said, mostly to himself. The driver took a step toward us. Commander Adrian? My father stopped walking. The driver was looking directly at me. He was maybe 50, gray at the temples. The kind of man who'd spent 30 years driving people who mattered and knew how to make you feel like you mattered too. That's me, I said. Mr. Keating sends his apologies for the change in schedule. He's asked if you could come up to the suite before the 1 o'clock. He wants to brief you personally before the task force call this afternoon. I nodded. That works. Give me 10 minutes. He stepped back, opened the rear door of the SUV, waited. I turned to my parents. My mother was smiling. The particular smile she had. The one that said, I have always known. The one from the hotel bathroom phone call. The one she'd been keeping for exactly this moment. My father was not smiling. He was standing very still, the way he went still sometimes, when something shifted faster than he could process it. His eyes moved from the driver to the vehicle to the placard, which I could now see had my full title and last name printed on it in clean block letters, and then to me. That's for you, he said. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of something reorganizing itself. Yes, I said. He didn't say anything else. I kissed my mother on the cheek. I told them I'd call that evening. I followed the driver to the SUV and got in, and as we pulled away, I looked back once. My father was standing on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets watching us go. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Not diminished, just human. Just a man standing on a sidewalk in Bethesda on a Saturday morning, watching his daughter get into a car that had been sent for her. The way his face looked in that moment, I'd been waiting for it my whole life. And now that it was there, I felt almost nothing except tired. And something else, something under the tired, something that might have been the beginning of peace. Lawrence Keating was the deputy director of a defense policy office I'd been working with on the task force. He was mid-50s, former Air Force, the kind of man who seemed like he should be gruff and turned out to be thoughtful. He'd been the one to push for my involvement in the task force after reading my brief, I later learned. He hadn't told me that himself. Ellen Marsh had. The meeting in the suite lasted 40 minutes. We went over the task force call agenda, talked through a few points of friction with one of the State Department liaisons, and he told me he'd be recommending me for the lead coordinator role in the second phase. I thanked him. I meant it. On the drive back to Alexandria, I sat in the quiet of the back seat and looked out the window at the city moving past the monuments. The wide stone faces of buildings that had been there for 200 years, the tourists with their strollers and their cameras. I thought about my father. He called that evening, like I'd said I would. I picked up. "That was something," he said. "This morning, it was just logistics, Dad. Change of schedule, Adrienne." His voice was different, quieter. "I didn't know it was like that for you." I didn't answer right away. I was standing at my window, watching the sky go the color it went in the evenings, that particular orange that made Alexandria feel like it might actually be livable. "You never asked," said. I kept my voice even. I wasn't angry, I was just telling the truth. A long silence. "I know I didn't." He cleared his throat. "Your mother tells me I don't ask enough. Mom's usually right." Another silence, this one had a different texture. "Are you good?" he said finally. "I mean, are you actually good? Not just fine. Are you good?" 9 years. He'd never asked me that. Not once in 9 years had he asked me that specific question in that specific way. I thought about the apartment with the good light. The task force, Ellen Marsh and her handshake. The Rear Admiral's note, Lawrence Keating and the second phase. The 40 minutes in that suite where nobody questioned whether I belonged there. "Yeah," I said. "I'm actually really good." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. And then, "Good." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a full accounting of the years of misdirected concern and withheld praise. It was 2 syllables and it was not enough, and it was also somehow the most honest thing he'd said to me in a long time. I let it be what it was. I don't tell this story to make my father look like a villain. He's not. He's a man who grew up being taught that men take care of things and women are taken care of, and he loved me through that lens for 34 years. And the lens was wrong, but the love was real. Those 2 things are both true. I've had to learn to hold them both at the same time. What I know now is this. I spent the better part of a decade waiting for him to see me the way I needed to be seen. I made decisions with one eye on his reaction. I felt his absence at my promotions even when he was standing right next to me. I carried that absence around like a stone in my chest and called it ambition, called it drive, called it something useful, so I didn't have to call it what it actually was. Grief. It was grief, missing a version of my father that maybe he never had the capacity to be. The morning in Bethesda didn't fix that. I want to be clear. He didn't suddenly become someone who called me every week to hear about the task force, who showed up to ceremonies, who figured out how to be proud of me in the language I needed. He's still working through what he knows how to be. That's his work to do, not mine. What Bethesda gave me was something else. It gave me the image of his face in that moment, still, reorganizing, surprised by the size of the life I'd built while he was looking somewhere else. And somehow, seeing his surprise made it real for me in a way that nothing else had. Not the commendations. Not the Rear Admiral. Not Ellen Marsh and her business card and her firm handshake. His surprise was the mirror I didn't know I needed. Because what his face said, standing on that sidewalk, was, "This is real. She is real. She has always been real, and I was just looking the wrong direction." And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't need him to say it out loud. I already knew. I had known for years. I'd just been waiting for permission to believe it. And on a Saturday morning in March, on a sidewalk in Bethesda, watching his daughter get into a car that had been sent for her, my father accidentally gave me what he'd been withholding for decades. He showed me that he finally saw what had always been true. I drove home through the cherry blossoms with the windows down, and I stopped waiting.